Oxbridge College of Pharmacy as assistant professor, and later she joined again JSS. She has received international travel grants from the International Society for Pharmacoepidemiology for the consecutive years 2018 and 2019. Her research expertise involves pharmacy practice, respiratory medicine, quality of life assessments, outcome-based evaluations, and drug allergy management. She has authored multiple publications, including journal articles, conference proceedings, and reviews. She has been recognized as Best Poster Presenter at Manipal College of Pharmaceutical Sciences in 2017. She is member secretary of IQAC as well as member of Anti-Discrimination Committee at JSS College of Pharmacy, Mysuru. With her brief profile, I would like to hand over the session to Madam Shilpa Garu. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for the introduction. May I share my screen?
Yes, madam. Yes. Okay.
Is my slides visible? May I confirm that my slides are visible?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. It is visible.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and I really thank on this outset the organizers for providing me the opportunity to be part of the FDP program. And as regulations today, I will be more dealing with the clinical research regulations in India and also the Schedule Y, which has been implemented and which deals with more of the regulatory activity related to the clinical research. So today we will be just talking about the introduction and some rules which is part of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act and regulatory requirements which is required for clinical trials to be conducted in India, committees for evaluation and their applications, regulatory pathway, regulatory approval pathway, and also, yes, slides are not moving. Slides are not moving, ma'am.
No, madam, it is not moving.
क्या है कि पीसी प्रोफाइल में कुछ करना बोल के है ना मैडम वो FDP प्रोग्राम ज्वाइन करना है क्या? अभी जो प्रिंसिपल डाले ना, अभी मुझको सुबह में डाले थे हम। और आप सब कुछ रेगुलेटरी या प्रेस्क्रिप्शन
Is my slides visible now, madam?
It is visible, madam.
Yes, madam, visible.
It's moving?
Yes.
Can you
Yes,
see
madam,
my
moving.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So this is the table, just the contents which I wanted to share you, that today we will be talking about these particular contents.
sorry.
So, may I continue, madam?
Excuse me, madam.
Yes,
Participant, please mute your mics. Achumand are
Hello?
madam, please continue, madam.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. Before we go into the understanding of the regulations and the requirements according to the Act, there are some important, what do we say, definitions which we have to understand. So let us just try and understand those definitions for today. The first is that to understand what exactly a clinical research means. Clinical research is an organized research. Yes, it is being conducted in human beings, and it is done basically to provide adequate information on the drug use, therapeutic agent, and safety and efficacy of the particular investigational product. We call an investigational product is a drug or a medical device or a diagnostic agent which we will be studying. Basically, we will be doing a research on that, and that applicable on the human beings. So clinical trial encompasses all these particular elements in the research. Clinical trial is a systematic study. Okay, it's a systematic study of any new drug in a human subject, and it helps in generating the data for discovering, verifying clinical aspect, pharmacological aspect, which will include both dynamics and kinetics, and the adverse effects with the particular new drug or a new entity which we are studying. And the whole objective of determining here is the safety and efficacy of a new drug before it is released into the market. Okay, so that is the whole purpose of conducting a clinical trial. Then a terminology of Schedule Y. Schedule Y is the requirements and guidelines for permission to import or to manufacture new drugs for sale or to take the clinical trial. The new drug regulations, which is also one of the important thing which we should understand, that it is a rule which has been published in the Gazette notification of 227, and this usually tells about the regulatory rules which is required to be followed for conducting a trial or for a new drug, new entity, or new formulation, or new diagnostic agent, or even a medical device. Somebody has a question. I think somebody has raised their hand. Should I take up the question?
No, madam, you may proceed.
Yeah. So the application of the new drug and IND, which will usually be filled in the form number 44, that is the application number, which is usually whenever we are conducting a trial for a new drug or an investigational new drug, we generally have to use this particular form to fill in the application. And in this new drug clinical trial rule, basically there was a rule Y which is scheduled, which would tell us about the trials. And in the year 2018, some new FAME rules were formed, which we call it as new drug and clinical trial rule. And this says that there is around 27 forms which has to be filled for different purposes to be conducted where we are filing an application for the new drug trial. Okay, so this was introduced as to streamline the approval process, because whenever there is a application to which has been applied or which they are asking for conducting a new drug trial, there was no fixed timelines. There was no transparency in the process. So to bring in the transparency, to have timelines, and to ease the approval process, and for them to understand if there is any error, any things which have been left out in the application, how to expedite these things. So though for framing all these and taking care of all these particular what is the concerns, and new regulations were brought, and this is called as new drug and clinical trial rule. Okay? So according to this, a clinical trial, whichever in relation to a new drug or investigational, means any systematic study of such new drug or investigational new drug in human subjects, basically to generate data and also to discover its clinical efficacy, its pharmacological concept, that is includes both pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic, its safety profile, which we basically say as adverse effects. So just to understand what is the difference between these two, where Schedule Y was earlier and now why did this new drug Clinical Trial Act came into picture. So the introduction was done as part of the DNC rules, and it was done in 1945. Since that, there are many changes which are occurred, advancement in the trials process requirement, and also the timeline requirements is different. And earlier, there was no timelines was there. But however, in this NDCT Act, the specific set of rules were introduced. Especially, this was prepared in the year of 2019, but it got published in 2019 to regulate new drug approval and clinical trials. So, it's more specific to this particular part. Then, based on the regulatory focus, the Schedule Y focused on clinical trials and approval of new drugs in India. NDCT Act expanded to cover all type of trials, including bioavailability studies, drugs on orphan, and approval of the new drugs. And the timelines were not there in Schedule Y, so there was lacking of the timelines, which was introduced in this particular act, which said that there is a defined timeline for approval, 30 to 90 days, depending upon the type of drug or the trial. Then compensation part was not mentioned in the clinical trial aspect in the Schedule Y. That was brought out in this particular act, where it clearly defines the compensation rules for injury or death which occurs during a clinical trial, and this is mandatory provision for compensation. So with this, we also try to understand the different other forms which are applicable, which need to be filled for a filing of the clinical trial of a new drug. And it is part of 10A of Drugs and Cosmetic Rules of 1945. That is 128A, which is an application for permission of import new drugs. 122B, where application for approval to manufacture new drugs. 122D, where permission to import or manufacture the fixed drug combinations, and a 122D AA, where permission to conduct clinical trials for new drugs, investigational new drugs, and 122E, which will tell you about what exactly a new drug means. So the regulatory requirements which is required to conduct a clinical trial in India for a new drugs includes many of the rule forms which have to be filled, and this form numbers are given here. For example, CT01, which is an application for registering, okay, for registration and renewal of ethics committee. So initially, when clinical trial have to be conducted, there is an important process. It has to undergo the review of ethics committee. So ethics committee should take care, and they should review the whole protocol and approve it. Then only the study will be taken care. So first of all, there should be a clinical ethics committee, and this ethics committee should be registered under the CDSO, or if it also has CDSO as a guidelines, ICMR also gives a guidelines, and there is specific number, at least 7 members should be there. 50% of them should not be belonging to the institution where the ethics committee is framed, and that there should be both medical, non-medical, lay person, a law person. These are the requirements for composing an ethics committee, and this ethics committee takes care of the approval or granting the permission to conduct such trial. So, but these ethics committee should be registered, and the registration usually it happens for a valid period of 5 years. Okay. So application for registration includes then grant of a registration of ethics committee will be done from the CT02 form. Then after granting it, there is an CT04 where it's application for permission to conduct clinical trial of new drug, especially the phase 1. And it includes the financial part also. And there are different other forms like CT24, which is an application for uh, having the license to import or unapproved new drugs to treatment. And CT25, where is the license to import unapproved drug for the patients having life-threatening diseases in government hospital and medical institution. CT26, which is an application for grant of permission to manufacture. And CT7 is permission to manufacture unapproved drug. And there is again different fees which is included, which is for pre-submission meeting, post-submission, and any other specific submission which will be occurring further. Then there are different committees which is there, which is got an evaluation process to be conducted. And this requires process of the application and different stages. So different committees will give you different permissions, and also they will be looking after certain important content. For example, if it's an ethics committee, it looks after the ethics of the whole particular a trial which is conducting. Then there is a subject expert committee, there is technical committee, apex committee. So these are different committees which evaluates the application for any clinical trial which application has been submitted. So IND committee, where it is the evaluation of the investigational new drug, where it is chaired by the Director General, and also the Indian Council of Medical Research and Secretary, and Department of Health and Research. Okay, so this committee which will approve the process for clinical trial. Then subject expert committee, which has 25 panels and around 350 medical experts will be there who are various therapeutic areas for the evaluation of the application of the clinical trial and new drug approvals which comes except the IND. Then technical committee, which is separate committee of experts, which are chaired by the Director General, and also which is assisting the Apex committee. Apex committee is the one which will recommend or first review and recommend whatever the changes is required in the whole process of the trial. So the regulatory pathway and the data requirements is the legal provisions for regulations of clinical trials, where the different rules are coming in, which is rule number 21, which tells you the application of permission to conduct clinical trial for a new drug or an investigational new drug. The rule 22, which telling the grant of permission to conduct the clinical trial, and rule 23 is one which tells about the permission to conduct clinical trial of a new drug or an investigational product. And rule number 24, which tells the permission to conduct clinical trial of a new drug already approved outside India. So, new drug and clinical trials, again, rule number 25, which is published under the NDACT rules 2019, which tells about the conditions for permission to be taken for conducting the clinical trial. And validity period is given by rule 26. And rule 27 tells post-trial access. After the trial, how it is accessible, what are the requirements required there. 28 tells about the academic clinical trial. Then 29 tells about the inspection parameter. Rule 30 tells that what is the reasons for there could be a suspension or cancellation of such permission to conduct. Rule 75 tells about the application process to have permission for importing new drug. And Rule 76 tells the grant of permission for importing new drugs for sales and distribution, condition of permission for import of new drugs or sales distribution, and suspension or cancellation of import permission for new drug. So rule number 83, license to manufacture new drug for sale or for distribution. 84 is for suspension and cancellation. And 85 is responsible for importers or manufacturers for new drugs. So, as I said, apart from telling the clinical trials, how to conduct, what are the different parameters required, different forms to be filled, different approvals to be taken under the NDCT, there is also an important component which was missing in the Schedule Y, was included in the NDCT 2019. And that was timeline and the automated approval of the clinical trials. So this component was brought out because the system to be placed so that the person who is applied for a clinical trial exactly understands at what time the approval may be expected, and he can plan the further activities, because lot of financial burden is included in this, which also it has to be undertaken when we are looking about the regulatory aspect. So the timeline which is mentioned here, it says timeline is usually 30 working days. So under the provision of sub rule 1 for the timeline, where it says where no communication has been received from the central licensing authority to the applicant within the set period, the permission to conduct clinical trial shall be deemed to have been granted. That means when an applicant has applied for the approval of clinical trial, and within the 30 working days, so I please understand the difference between working days and calendar days. Okay, so working days where it is removal of the Sundays and the general holidays. So that 30 working days, when there is nothing which has been communicated from the office of the central licensing authority to the applicant, then it is said to be done that this application is approved. Okay, and that deemed applications can be taken as a legal. It's a legally valid, and it can be all the purposes of the applicant shall be authorized to initiate in the clinical trial. Similarly, in rule number 23, which again sub rule under 23, where it says the applicant who has taken deemed approval, that means he has taken the approval under sub rule 1, and the provision of sub rule 1 is applied into that particular permission. The applicant shall, before initiating the clinical trial, inform the central licensing authority in the form CT 4A. So that means he has got the approval, or it has happened under the sub rule 1. Once that is done, he will be informing the central licensing authority through form CT4A to tell that there is an approval of this, approval was of this date. Okay, so then he, or the, as I said, central licensing authority shall on this basis will inform that the recorded CT4A will be part of the official record, and he shall be called as the automatic approval from the central licensing authority. So this is the rule applicable under this. Then validity of permission of initiating clinical trials, it is 2 years from the date of its issue, unless extended by the central licensing authority. So the validity period for the permission is valid for 2 years, and especially from the date of issue. Once this is done, it has to be completed within 2 years. Otherwise, there would have been certain again request from the applicant, and when the licensing authority approves it, it can be extended. So the data which is required for processing the central trial application or approval trial application is it is similarly like how we process for INDA. So where it is chemical and pharmaceutical information of the investigational product, the animal pharmacology. So the animal studies reports have to be kept in, and both pharmacological studies, toxicological studies. Then phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, and regulatory status in the other country. And also, if suppose they have any import, then import information, how it will be imported, all that has to be, along with the labeling, prescribing information should be there. And chemical and pharmaceutical information, which will all includes the API, so the physiochemical characterization, description of the drug, and complete specification have to be mentioned for the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And in the form of different formulation, what is the dosage form, composition, excipient compatibility studies, validation analytical methods have to be mentioned. So animal pharmacology studies should include pharmacological action, the pharmacokinetic studies, pharmacodynamics, or ADME studies, general pharmacology, including the supplemental pharmacological studies should be mentioned. Animal toxicology studies should include toxicity studies, male fertility studies, female reproduction and development toxicology, ocular toxicity, genotoxicity, and carcinogenicity studies should be included. The information, and with human or clinical pharmacology for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, what it has to be provided, and the special studies which provide a BA/BE study also should have the clinical pharmacology present. Then regulatory status in the other countries, whether the other countries this is a labeled drug or it is yet to be approved, what is the status of marketing, or if there is withdrawn, what is the reason for withdrawal. All these things have to be mentioned in the application. Prescribing information, proposed full prescribing information, including the drafts, labels, and cartons should be present. And samples should be given enough so that the protocol testing can be done, and full impurity profile and release specifications should be attached with that. So this is a broader way to explain how the regulatory pathway for an approval occurs for a new drug or an investigational new drug, wherein you can see that it starts from the application, whether the drug can be imported or manufactured. Depending upon this, the different forms will be included. So if the drug API has to be imported or dosage form has to be, so it has to go along with those applications. And then with all the information, the NDA or IND application can be with the information which I mentioned now, starting from the characterization, chemical characterization, physical forms, and the animal toxicity, animal studies, phase 1, phase 2 studies, whatever the information we have to submit it as an application with the clinical trial. So preliminary examination will be done with all the evaluation committees. After the evaluation by IND and the subject expert committee, then the recommendations will be done. So this recommendation, if there is a query raised, suppose they have provided information, they have some queries which is generated, they have some questions to be approval. So they will be raising that as a query. And that queries have to be responded immediately by the applicant. So after he responds it, then the evaluation committee, again, they will be reviewing whether the provided response is appropriate and it is satisfactory according to their needs. And then the recommendation will be either approval or rejection. So once it is approval, the application to import and manufacturing and permission will be given. Okay. So this is the whole regulatory pathway for approval of NDA or IND. Then approval process through online portal for grant license for new drug. So the application will be received from the nodal officer. Once the nodal officer reviews it, completion, then he would be forwarding it with a reviewing officer. Reviewing officer will check according to the different norms and different forms which is present, the relevancy of that, the supplement information given, and then after the review, it will be forwarded to the nodal officer, where the after which there will be further forwarded to the DDA or DA. Any deficiency here, again the query will be raised, it will be set back, and the query be after approval, it will be going to the permission grant. Once it is permission granted digitally, then the permission will be uploaded. So this is an online way it occurs, the whole process which we studied in the last one. So there are global clinical trials also conducted. Global clinical trials means where the sponsor is trying to understand the efficacy, safety parameter by conducting clinical trial in different parts of different world. So same drug, same protocol, same process will be conducted. Maybe in India, it may be conducted in the Middle East, or it may be conducted in US part, or it may be in some other part of the world, where simultaneously studies are going, but it is just of the same drug, and the components of are changed with the geographical location. So this is a global clinical trial. So global clinical trials are research studies which are conducted simultaneously across multiple countries to evaluate safety, efficacy, quality of new drugs and medical devices. And these trials will allow the researcher to gather diverse data, because there are various population, the race may be different, the geographical condition factors may be altering, then the patient population is different, their genetics is different. So there are so many factors which may influence the dynamic and kinetic property of a drug, which is studied at once in different parts of the world, which will give the concise information about these parameters. And this will help in ensuring the treatment is more effective and safe across different demographic and geographical regions. So global clinical trials are very essential, and nowadays everything happens with the global clinical trial. And this helps in accelerating the drug development and also getting approvals of regulatory approvals from multiple market. So even because the drugs, it has been tested in US, it is tested in India, it is tested in Japan. So there are different Europe, there are different regulatory authorities which do. So because since the studies are done there, and also the other part of the world data is submitted, it becomes far more easier to take the regulatory approval in multiple markets. So that is an advantage of doing global clinical trials. So for example, the clinical development of COVID-19 vaccine, which was developed by Pfizer, Moderna, and also different other things which came into picture. And so this, how it got faster approval, because simultaneously the trials were started conducting in US, Brazil, Africa, Germany, and we involved in diverse populations, and they expedited the trials such a way that the vaccines were, the understanding of the efficacy and safety of the vaccine in different ethnicity and geographical regions were faster, and it came into the market much faster than expected to help the condition at that particular time. So that is how it fastens, and it also spreads up the regulatory approval from different worldwide regulatory agencies. So for global clinical trials, the sponsor must conduct a trial as per the ICH GCP guidelines. ICH GCP guidelines is a guideline which harmonizes different regulatory requirements into one particular platform, wherein conduct of the trial is same wherever you are conducting, whether you are conducting in India, whether you are conducting US or in any other part of the world. The process, the way it should be conducted, the requirements which is required, the documents which need to be presented, everything will be specified and it will be common. So this will give a common platform or common way of projecting the data, which further helps in processing, analyzing, and giving the decision. So guidelines, there are different guidelines which are present for helping us to understand the conduct of a clinical trial. For example, GCP guidelines, which is published in 2001 by the Ministry of Health, CDSO, India. So this GCP is good clinical practice. It tells you that how the clinical trial should be conducted, which site, how to select a site when you are conducting a clinical trial, how to select an investigator. Investigators are usually physicians or that is doctors or consultants who are expertise in that particular area of treatment, and how to check their qualification, how to shortlist them, what are the other requirements they have to check when we are talking about the investigator or the site where they are identifying, and how to document it, how to prepare a documentation, how the process should be set. Everything will be mentioned in the GCP, and ICH GCP guidelines tells the different process. It tells you how to monitor the safety, how to report a safety report if any adverse drug reaction has happened, how whom to report, where to report, how to report, or and how the documents should be prepared. What do you mean by ethics committee? How the ethics committee should be constituted? For whom the members there? What are the different documents which should be submitted by the sponsor for ethics committee approval? So it starts from investigator brochure, it may be a protocol, then it is the all the different policies, insurance for the participants, informed consent form, then different logs which have to be presented, then different patient information leaflets which have to be there. Everything will be mentioned in ICP-GCA guide, which is require SOPs to conduct a clinical trial, SOPs to document, SOPs for destruction, SOPs for archival, everything will be given, and this has to be followed very, very rigorously. It has to be followed. Then there is also a separate guidelines to framing and for understanding the roles and responsibility of the ethics committee. So ethics guidelines for biomedical research, which is published by ICMR, tells you the whole process of who should be the ethics committee chairman, what members, how many members should be present, from which background, what are the different roles and responsibility of each member who is present in the ethics committee. All these will be written, and it is written and documented in the ICMR published ethics guidelines for biomedical research. And other related guidelines, which is related for importing or preparation, manufacturing, and bringing out the labels, everything is mentioned by the CDSO guidelines. So, good, as I was mentioning, the good clinical practice guidelines, it was published in 2001, and GLP, the good laboratory practice, which was again published by CDSO in 2005, and the draft guidelines for chemical and pharmaceutical information, stability study approval for clinical trials, especially the bio equivalent studies, which posted in 2011, and draft guidelines for conduction or requirements of chemical and pharmaceutical information, stability data, what data should be published, what data should be taken, is mentioned in the CDSO. Then applications review renewal status, then on national guidelines on stem cell research is there, then guidelines on biologicals, which is mentioned by DBT CDSO 2012 and again revised by from at 2016. And there's also a handbook for applicant and reviewers of clinical trials of new drug in India, which was brought out in January 2011. So these are all the guidelines which will help us understand, and it will guide us what are the different processes involved, what documents to be made ready, what regulations are applicable here, and how to take up this in when conducting a clinical trial. So similarly, the guidance for clinical trial, which also has many things listed out here. So it can tell you about the new drug or investigational new drug, clinical trial site, how it should be, what requirements are required, then application for permitting to conduct the clinical trial, then validity period, as we mentioned earlier also, academic clinical trial, what we should do, what are the process, what are the regulations to be taken, because it's a smaller setup, not like a larger setup of a global trial. And inspection process, who all will be inspecting, what are the regulatory requirements when the inspection happens, what you should do, all that is required. And suspension of cancellation permission of clinical guidelines are also available. Then expert committee, as I said, there are different committees which is involved in bringing up the or reviewing the process. In that, the subject expert committee is included in the clinical trial rules, and it is a committee which reviews, and the review is now legal, and it's not just administrative process. It's not just for reviewing the process. The whatever the committee gives information or tells the changes required is all legalized, so it can be taken as a very important document. Then it also gives the document for preparation. The members training schedule can be planned. It's a time bound review proposals, and increased accountability and transparency is helpful in these kind of review process. Some of the appendices which is required here is the data to be submitted along with application. That is Appendix 1, which gives the required data of importing or manufacturing, which is already approved in the country. Appendix 2 gives have to be given information on the structure, contents, format for clinical trial reports. Appendix 3 gives the animal toxicity or the non-clinical toxicity studies, which can be what is the requirement, how it should be taken, what documentation is required, what data is required will be mentioned. Appendix 4, which is for animal pharmacology. Appendix 5 is for informed consent. 6 is for fixed drug combinations, and 7 is for undertaking by the investigator. So 7, 8 is again the ethics committee the approval letter, the registration letter, members list that has to be given. In 9, the stability test reports have to be given. In 10, the content of the proposed protocol for conducting the clinical trial has to be documented. And in 11, the data elements for reporting serious adverse events during the clinical trial. It's very, because trial has to be both checking the efficacy and the safety when we are talking about. So to brief about and to conclude exactly what we have learned today is that we have understood what we meant by a clinical trial, what is clinical research, what is clinical trial, what do you mean by new drug application, what was the earlier schedule, that was Schedule Y, and now the new drug and clinical trial rules have come, which was framed in 2018, and now it is implemented in 2019. And by doing this, the Indian government, it has streamlined the approval process of new drugs, regulation of these clinical trials, and also to see that safety and rights of the participants is well. Because you saw that these rules will tell you about the, first of all, the conduct. Secondly, it will tell you the timelines, the ethics committee, which is very important to be done, and there is some good clinical practices which has to be followed. Then NDCT also simplifies the regulatory requirements. So it tells you the documents provided, the rules which is applicable. I told you what are 21, what is rule 22, what till 30. I told you what each rule means, and where you can identify if you have a doubt on one parameter, the particular rule is well defined in that. So it will help you, simplifies you to understand the requirements and accordingly prepare your documents, and accelerates the timelines for drug approval and promotes innovation by incentivizing the clinical research. So also patient safety is taken care here. The compensatory parameter came into picture, which was not there in the Schedule Y. So it also emphasized the ethical conduct of the trial. So there are the requirement of framing the ethics committee, when it should be framed, where it should be registered, under what body, what is the regulation of the ethics committee, the members, the rules and regulations, and the review process. The documents to be submitted for ethics committee is well defined. So that will really safeguard the rights of the participants who are participating in the clinical research, and includes mandatory registration, and especially for compensation of injury or death for the requirement for the patients who are undergoing, patients, I would not say participants who are undergoing or they are under the clinical trial. Also, informed consent process. As I said, that is one of the process which will be mentioned in the ICH GCP guidelines. Informed consent means taking the consent of the participant. He has to consent it voluntarily. That means nobody should force him. No parent, no belonging person or any physician, they cannot force the person. It is basically a voluntary movement. So herein, the whole protocol will be summarized in such a way with a very simple language that any person who can read and write will understand. Even without the medical background, they will be able to understand. And the process will be given, that this information will be given by the investigator. Investigator is the person who is conducting the clinical trial. Okay, so that person, not the sponsor, not the company. Company is called a sponsor. The doctors who are at the site who will be conducting these trials are called as investigators. So those investigators will be explaining this to the participants. Participants will be given enough time to read or take that information to their concerned family or the relatives to understand it. Once they read, understand, they may come and ask you questions, wherein you answer the questions. If they are satisfied, then you give them the form, and wherein they voluntarily fill and sign it. So that is the whole process of informed consent. So there is also rules if the patient, if the participant does not know to read and write, what we should do. So there should be a member of the family who can be there in presence, and they can be an impartial witness who can sign on behalf of them. Then also the legally representative person should be there. Then all these documents, each and everything which we have to conduct in a clinical trial is very, very specifically mentioned in the guidelines which I have mentioned earlier, which will give the complete process. And overall, this NDCT Act fosters an environment where it is very conclusive to have a clinical research where it is more prioritized for the patient safety and compliance with the global standard. So global studies conducted, everything can be brought into one platform, one way of doing it. So every regulatory, the requirements are satisfied with. So this is about the whole clinical trial regulations, which I could summarize it for you people for your better understanding. These are some of the references which we have taken for preparing the slides. So thank you. And if anybody has any questions, you can raise it. Ma'am, if there is no questions, then the other part of this session, my colleague will be taking care, and I would like to introduce him. Is Mr. Balaji, faculty of Department of Pharmacy Practice, and he will be further continuing on the safety parameters, especially in the clinical trials. So that is also a very important way to explain the clinical regulations. May I, with your
Yes, ma'am. Yes, yes,
Hello everyone, am I audible?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Shilpa ma'am, for introducing me to the participants, and I also thank ma'am for overviewing the regulatory requirements for the conduct of the clinical trials. And in my session, I'll be taking taking on particularly on a safety reporting in the clinical trials, because this is one of the very important aspect where patients would be at a stake of responsibility, would be suffering from any of the adverse events in the due process of the clinical trials, which requires a very stringent monitoring, and in some cases stringent actions also need to be taken. So that is why this topic has been chosen, and I'll be talking on safety reporting in clinical trials. So I'll be covering in the next few minutes. I'll be covering on introduction to safety reporting, objectives of the safety reporting, basic terminologies that we use in the reporting, particularly in the due process of the conduct of the clinical trials, what need to be reported to the regulatory authorities and whom to be reported, how to report. I will be covering, and also the stakeholders, various stakeholders involved, or the team involved in the and along with their responsibilities, then reporting timelines, required data elements, what to be reported, because everything and anything can't be reported, but there is a certain elements that need to be reported. So that also would be discussed here, and also the compensation of SAE, particularly in case of death. So because something which would have happened due to the participation in the clinical trial, that need to be compensated. So there is a legal obligation and ethical obligation as well. So that is why, in particularly for death need to be compensated, that will also be discussed. So moving forward, as we know, safety monitoring and reporting is the most important requirement of ICH, GCP, and regulatory agencies across the globe. Any regulatory agency you take, they give a first priority or a first preference to the safety of the participant or a patient. So for which there should be a monitoring and there should be a reporting. So reporting in the sense communicating is what the overall concept is. So if you look into the regulatory agencies like FDA, EMA, and CDSCO, and any other regulatory agencies that you take across the globe, they transpose the ICH GCP requirements, which was once said to be a requirement, into a law. Law in the sense which has to be followed without any change in it, and set out a legal requirement. So that has become a legal requirement today, and for any clinical trial that need to be conducted among the human being, that has to be followed through the ICH GCP requirements. Then more to that, apart from the rules, regulations, and the compulsion from regulatory agencies, there will always be a ethical and a scientific obligation. So for any individual, if I'm any clinician is looking into a patient who comes for a routine checkup, they will always have ethical obligations by providing appropriate treatment. And here there is one more term that is added here as a scientific obligation, where science is supported to this. Objectives of the safety reporting is to determine the safety profile of a drug, where we would be looking into the safety, what adverse events are common with that particular drug, or a device when we use, or what to be considered, what diseases we can give that particular medication, we cannot give. All that can be looked into this, and then to evaluate the risk and benefit of the product. So whether the new drug or a device that we are planning to bring into the market, is it showing any beneficial effect, or the beneficial effect is less than the risk? All that can be evaluated using the safety parameters. Then provide the information for the package insert if approved for the market. If you look into any drug which is available in the market, if you open up tertiary packing, there will always be an information pack, a leaflet, either to the healthcare professional or to the patient. So any information that has to be kept would be defined, or it would be defined by this safety parameters alone. So before we get into the actual process, we should understand some of the basic terminologies that we regularly and routinely use in the safety reporting. The first one is a adverse event, or otherwise we abbreviate it as a AE, which is said to be any untoward medical occurrence in a patient or a clinical trial subject administered a medicinal product, and which does not necessarily have a causal relationship with this treatment. If you have to take a simple understanding or a layman understanding, once on any new drug or any test drug has been taken, anything and everything that happens post to that should be considered as an adverse event, wherein there should not be any established causal relationship to that particular drug. So whatever happens has to be considered as an adverse event. Then adverse reaction. So which is nothing but any untoward or unintended response to a medicinal product related to any dose administration. So which is related, that means there is a causal relationship between the drug and the event that at any dose that is administered to be considered as a adverse reaction. Next is a unexpected adverse reaction that we call as UAR, which is an adverse reaction, the nature or severity of which is not consistent with the applicable product information. So which is nothing but product information which is already been approved, printed and inserted into the packages, but is called as a product information. So if any unexpected reaction happens, which is not consistent with the product information, approved product information, such types of reaction to be considered as a unexpected adverse reaction. Then the next terminology is suspected unexpected serious adverse reaction. We abbreviate it as SUSAR, which is a serious adverse reaction that is both unexpected and suspected to be caused by a investigational drug. Any unexpected reaction that happens or any suspected reaction that happens, in both the cases, if the reaction is said to be serious in nature, then we call that reaction as a suspected unexpected serious adverse reaction. Next is what to be reported. Any adverse event that happens in during the due process of the clinical trial has to be reported. So it can be a severe reaction, it can be a serious reaction. Severe reactions can be a disabling, so permanent disability or a temporary disability maybe, and rarely life-threatening. Most do not lead to a long-term problems. Severe reactions include all serious reactions, but also include other severe reactions. So please be very careful with this statement. Severe reactions include serious reactions. So all serious reaction that comes under the seriousness criteria to be considered as a severe reaction, but also there are other serious reactions which does not fall under the seriousness criteria, which we will discuss in the further. And all these information or all these reactions must be reported without any delay. So serious reactions are any untoward medical occurrence that happens at any dose, which leads to resulting in the death, life-threatening, requires inpatient hospitalization. So that means the patient, the reason for the hospital admission is because of the reaction, then result in the persistent or a significant disability, which would have led to a disability, might be a temporary disability or might be a long or permanent disability also, and then congenital anomaly. In any of these, when any reaction that fall into this category should be considered as reaction. There is one more here, particularly in the requires inpatient hospitalization. Already patient has been in the scenario like where the patient has been admitted to the hospital, maybe to the general ward, and then as the days progress, the reaction turns out to be more severe or more complex to manage in the general ward. In such cases, we need to transfer them to the intensive care units. That also to be considered as a serious reactions. So what stakeholders involved in the reporting of safety reporting in the clinical trials are investigators. So as their ethical and scientific responsibility, investigators are also a part of it. Sponsor, they would be knowing a complete information about the chemical moiety that has been given to the patient. They would also be involved. Then institutional review board or institutional ethics committee, which is a very important board that acts on looks into the complete safety and integrity of the clinical trials in that particular site. So these three are the stakeholders which are very, very important. They would be very closely monitoring the activity safety parameters of any clinical study drugs, and they would be reporting it to the next higher ups, which we would be discussing now. So the responsibilities of the stakeholder is in case of an investigator, as per the law or as per the requirements of the ICH GCP, particularly E6R2, investigator has to report all suspected adverse events immediately to the sponsors. The immediate report should be followed promptly by a detailed written report. So which means that wherein the moment an investigator get to know the patient has developed a serious adverse event, that has to be reported to the ethics committee, to the sponsor, to the regulatory agency of the particular country. In India, it is CDSCO, and to the head of the institution in which a clinical trial is being carried out, should be reported within 24 hours of the occurrence or the 24 hours of the first information. The moment we get to know, our time starts clicking, and then within 24 hours, this information has to be brought into the notice of all the regulatory authorities. Then the investigator should also report a prompt detailed report. So within the 14 days, the investigator has to submit a complete written detailed report to the same stakeholders for the assessment purpose. That should happen within 14 calendar days. And then the investigator should also comply with the applicable regulatory requirements related to the reporting of unexpected serious adverse reaction to regulatory authorities and IRB or IEC. So this is very, very important whenever there is a the unexpected serious adverse reaction, that is UAR or SUSAR, that happens immediately. Those information has to be reported to the ethics committee of the particular site which it is associated with. That should happen through the proper reporting system. Then moving forward to the other stakeholder involved in the clinical trial as sponsor, and there again, as per the ICH GCP E6R2, the sponsor is responsible for the ongoing safety evaluation of the investigational product. So any ongoing safety evaluation has to be done. That is the complete responsibility of the sponsor, and they will stand responsible for everything and anything related to the safety. Then again, sponsor should also promptly notify. So whatever the information they would have got from the sites or from the investigator, they should notify to the concern. Again, they should notify to the other concerned investigations who would be there in the other sites, and also to the institution and other institutions which are part of it might be a global clinical trials or a national clinical trials. That should be informed to the every other investigators and the institutions. Then regulatory authorities of the particular country where the clinical trial is going on. If it is a multinational or a global trials, even the regulatory authorities of the other countries also to be notified with the findings that could affect adversely to the subject. So whoever the subject may be, it's not just only an affected person. Whoever is involved in the clinical trials should also be notified. Then impact the conduct of the trial. So wherever there is an impact in the conduct of the trial, you might have heard many a times particularly in the scientific news bulletins, where the headline says so and so company's clinical trial has been stopped abruptly. What could be the reason is basically because of the safety issues which could have impact on the conduct of the clinical trial. Somewhere in some other country, there would have been reports stating because of that particular drug something serious has happened, which means that that would have definitely affected to the might affect to the other individuals who are actually a participants in the other parts of the world also as well. Or if there is any change in the IRB or IEC approvals, for example, a site in Bangalore might have approved the trial and it would have been performing well, but a site in Hyderabad might observe something which is very critical and found to be very harmful to the patient. In such cases, they might take an unfavorable opinion. So which it means that they don't want to continue the clinical trial in their site. So that information also to be communicated to all the sites and its ethics committee, associated ethics committees, and the institutions which has approved to conduct the clinical trials should be informed with along with its reason why they're not continuing with the clinical trial. So this information is very, very important, which helps in the regulatory authorities to look into what is happening, and then even it helps them to take a decision whether to continue with that particular trial in the country or not. Then other stakeholder here is a very important stakeholder, IRB, or institutional review board or institutional ethics committee, which plays a very vital role in the ensuring the ethical conduct of the clinical trial. So it is not just they review the documents and they give approval for the conduct of the clinical trial. It is something beyond to that, where they have to follow the ethical conduct. So ethically, we are treating the patient to the study subjects, particularly in reviewing of the serious adverse events, SAEs, which they have to follow the guidelines that has been set forward by the Indian regulation guidelines as per a Schedule Y of NDCT Rule 2019 and ICMR guidelines. So both are all both goes hand in hand, and they do have to follow the complete regulations that has been put forward by their by the respective agencies. What it includes is review of the SAE reports. Once the SAE is reported to the Institutional Ethics Committee, they review, they might make a committee to review the reports. The committee might visit to the hospital, interact with the patient, or they might review the each and every document of the patient, what the patient has been treated with, what before the reaction, after the reaction, what has been treated, what investigations has been made for the confirmation of the reaction. All that can be reviewed from them, and then it is the responsibility of the IEC to provide opinion on the causality. So this is very, very important, which the committee says whether the reaction is due to the drug, or might be due to the drug, or not due to the drug. This gives a very stringent information, which the regulatory agencies would be looking at. Then ensure the timely reporting from the stakeholder, particularly the Institutional Ethics Committee point of view. They will have a 30 calendar days to report the information or whatever the assessment they have done to the other stakeholders. That might be CDSO in India. So they will have a 30 days time. Then protect the participant rights and safety. This is very, very important, because every individual will have their own rights and they will have their own safety concerns. That ethics committee always will put forward a certain rules and regulation to the practicing side to protect the patient's rights and safety. Then communicate with the regulatory authorities. So this is a very important one and a very mandatory one for an ethics committee. They stand they stand firm with the communications that they are supposed to do, and what is the timelines, what communications they are sending. All that would be taken care by the ethics committee. Then documentation, so which is very, very important in the clinical trial. They should maintain all the documents that has been communicated from the sponsor, and the other way that has been communicated from the site personnel, or that has been communicated from the regulatory authorities related to that particular trial, or might be completely related to the ethical conduct of the clinical trial. That has to be documented in the ethics committee. Next, moving to the reporting timelines, FDA, EMA, and other regulatory agencies. Any reaction which is said to be a fatal or a life-threatening, suspected, unexpected, serious adverse reactions should be reported not later than 7 calendar days. I think you all know the difference between the calendar days and the working days. Calendar days, which is inclusive of all government holidays, all weekends, or all any holidays that comes in between. That is all inclusive. Whereas working days is nothing but a weekends are removed, and then the government holidays are not considered. That is the difference. So here it is a calendar days after the sponsor has information that case reported fulfill the criteria for a fatal or a life-threatening. So the moment sponsor get to know that there is a reaction that has happened, and that reaction is fulfilling the criteria of seriousness. So within 7 days, they should report it to the regulatory agencies, and then followed by a follow-up information again within further 8 calendar days. And then if still the patient is still in the hospital and still all the seriousness criteria has still been applicable to the patient, then every 8 days it is the responsibility of the sponsor to update the information to the regulatory authorities. And in case of other suspected serious adverse reactions, no later than 15 calendar days after the sponsor has information for the about the reaction has to be reported. Then, if you look into the Indian regulatory regulations or Indian regulatory requirements, it is as per the Indian regulations, Schedule Y of drugs and cosmetic rules. All SAEs have to be reported to the CDSCO within 24 hours of their occurrence by the investigator, followed by a detailed analyzed report within 14 days by investigator and sponsor, both of them. So which means that the moment we get to know within 24 hours, we should inform to the CDSCO, we should inform to the ethics committee, we should inform it to the sponsor and also to the head of the institution of that particular site where the clinical trial is being conducted. And then within 14 working days, again, or sorry, within 14 calendar days, again, it is a responsibility of a sponsor or sorry, the responsibility of investigator to report it to the same regulatory or authorities to whom it was reported on as a first report. Then pharmaceutical company or the sponsor CRO investigator is responsible for the SAEs within the applicable timeline. So all the reports, all these information has to be reported within the applicable timeline. So you can ask what will happen if it has not been compiled or not been followed. So first thing is there will always be a safety concerns wherein the regulatory agency might take a strict action against the investigator or the site itself, or sometimes if it is a repeated mistakes that has been done by the site, which actually usually been monitored by the institutional ethics committee, even that would also will become a responsible for delaying the information. So many people would be affected, and the safety of a patient is also at stake. Hence, this has to be reported as per the timelines. Then if you look into the how the system happens within the timelines, within 24 hours of the, sorry. So within 24 hours of the occurrence, initial report would be sent by the investigator. So investigator will send it to the sponsor or a CRO, then chairman of the ethics committee, and also the DCGI. In turn, it is a CDSCO. Then in the meantime, the investigator also should report a detailed analysis to the chairman of the ethics committee, then head of the institution, DCGI. So here, in the meantime, chairman of the ethics committee will also communicate the very important informations to the expert committee, which is maybe appointed by the CDSCO or the DCGI. Then in the meantime, sponsor would also be communicating to the head of the institutions and also to the chairman of the ethics committee. And particularly if there is any death that if it would have occurred, that information would also be sent to the chairman of the expert committee. And then as the days progress, within 30 calendar days of a SAE occurrence, ethics committee will also notify the information to the DCGI, that is a CDSCO. They will also create a expert committee, chairman of they would send information to the expert committee. They would give recommendation to the DCGI. In that, in turn, those recommendation will directly reach to the sponsor or a representative for the purpose of compensation particularly in case of death. That usually that would happen within 150 days. Then from that day onwards, within 30 days, it is a responsibility of the sponsor to issue the check or a check. Usually it is a check, payment check in favor of to their subject. If usually subject will not be alive, so it is to the relative, in favor of the relative, and then that has to be compensated within 30 days. What will happen if we miss any of these timelines? So since it is a very, very serious case, that is death, there might be a huge penalty, and the individual involved, whoever is involved, they might be at a stake with respect to their profession. In certain cases where there are instances where some investigators are being barred from practicing. In some cases, investigators are being fined. In some cases, investigators are completely barred from the conduct of the clinical trials in their lifetime. And there are situations where hospital has been put into the blacklist, which means that no clinical trials would go to that particular hospital for the conduct. So in such a huge penalty would be there, which would impact a lot in the further days. Then moving to the data elements now, which is very, very important here. Data elements required are subject details. So without the subject, nothing can happen. So for which we need to give the details of the subject, which include the subject's initials and other relevant identifier. That could be a age, gender, their IP number. Usually and always, we should not reveal the name of the patient, only an initial of the patient, maybe or we can say the code or identification code of the patient has to be given. Their name should never be revealed. Then weight and height of the patient, date of birth of the patients, those informations has to be provided to the provided in the SAE reporting. Then details about the suspected drug. So that details include generic name of the drug. Always remember, always you are going to report any reactions. It might be a serious or it might be a non-serious reaction. It can be an adverse drug reaction or an adverse event. Always remember to write the suspected drug name in a generic name, not in the brand name. Then indications for which the suspected drug was used. What for did we use them for the particular disease condition? The name of that particular disease condition has to be written. Then what was the dosage form that we used for the administration of that particular drug? The strength of the drug in the that might be a milligram or a microgram, that has to be mentioned. Then daily dose. What was the dose that was given? It along with its frequency. That might be a twice daily, thrice daily. In a day, they are consuming it about 100 mg, which was divided into 3 times a day, including its route of administration has to be mentioned. Then what was the starting date of the drug and the time of day? So when was the drug was started? That has to be informed. Then stopping date. When did an investigator stop the medication, and that date, time, or duration of the treatment. Then other elements include concomitant medication. So if they are definitely when the patients who get enrolled into a clinical trial, it is not just only the trial drug they would be taking. They would also be taking several other drugs. So that includes concomitant medications, might be for their other underlying disease condition treatment of that. So whatever they are taking from before the clinical trial and also during the SAE that has happened, that has to be that has to be captured. Then details of the serious adverse event. This is very, very important. So this gives a whole fair idea about anyone who looks into for the assessment would be aware of it. So that include full description of SAE. So it might be from which hospital that has been reported, what is the severity, what is the seriousness criteria, what diagnosis has been made, and what is the causality assessment. So here again, causality assessment as like an adverse drug reaction, we also use a standard set of algorithm, but more to that here, what matters is the investigator's opinion. So if investigator feel that that reaction might be or a reaction is due to the drug, it will be considered 100% as it is due to the drug only. Right. Then start date of the onset of the event. When did the event started? So again, that has to be taken, start date as well as the time also. Then once the patient recovers from the event, we have to mention the stop date and the time of duration of the event. How long the patient was suffered from the SAE, what happened, when did it stop, at what time it subsided, all that has to be done. Then de-challenge and re-challenge information. So once the SAE happens, usually what they do is investigator stops the medication, that is a de-challenge, and once it subsides, they might reinitiate the medication, that is called as a re-challenge. If the de-challenge has been done, it's date and time. If a re-challenge has been done, its date and time has to be captured without missing it. Then setting here in the sense, where did this reaction occurred? Whether the reaction occurred in the hospital, outpatient clinic, or in the home has to be captured. Then result of a specific test. So what test has been done to the patient? So that specific test, which is very clearly stating that the reaction, explaining the reaction. So for example, if a clinician or investigator reports anemia, the expected laboratory report is hemoglobin level. Right? And then further RBC indices, which explains us what type of anemia it is. So that has to be reported. Then treatment that may have been provided or conducted. So what treatment have we given for that particular reaction to treat that particular reaction also to be reported. So these are the very important details that has to be captured, or elements that has to be captured. Then further, what has happened once the treatment has been initiated, or what has happened to the patient? So that is a outcome. So the information on recovery or any sequel. So during the process of recovery, either there might be a chance, the expectation is the reaction should subside. So in the process of subsiding of reaction, there is also a chance that reaction might trigger or exaggerate or exacerbate, or any other sequel it can happen. So that also to be captured. Then details of the compensation provided for injury or death. So this is very, very important. This has to be captured by the investigator and has to be reported during the reporting to the regulatory agencies during the follow-up reports. That is what we report after 14 days of the initial report. Then details of the investigator. Who is the investigator? Their phone number, name, address, what is their professional, that means particularly the specialty. If they are general medicine, that is a physician, surgeon, surgeon. In case of nephrologist, that would be a nephrologist. So that specialty has to be mentioned. Then date of reporting event to the licensing authorities. Here comes the two different dates. One is the initial date and a follow-up date. So both has to be mentioned. When did we report the first report of the particular reaction, and then follow-up, the date of the follow-up report has to be reported. Then date of reporting the event to ethics committee overseeing the site. So this is very, very important. We should be in this also to be considered, because for them also they would be looking into the they would be looking for assessment of the reaction. They would be responding back to the sponsor. They would be responding back to the regulatory agencies, and that would be addressed by the based on the suggestions that has been given by the ethics committee. Even the regulatory agencies would be would be taking a call on whether to what compensation to be given, whether to continue the trial or not, whether to continue that particular patient into that study or not. All that would be taken, would be reviewed from them. At the end, signature of the investigator for the authenticity of the report. So these are the very important data elements that has to be captured whenever we report an serious adverse event to the regulatory agencies in India. Particularly in India, it is CDSCO. Next, moving forward, compensation of SAE, when particularly in case of death. So compensation would be given in terms of money to them. Compensation is applicable if the death is related to an investigational product, which can be a drug, device, or a biological agent, or which might be due to a protocol violation or a negligence by the sponsor or investigator. So which means that if there is a change in the protocol, violation of the protocol, for example, on the 20th day, drug has to be administered. However, it has been missed and administered on the 24th day. That is a violation. In such cases, also, if a patient dies, that the compensation has to be given. Then, due to the failure of investigational product. So, if investigational product did not work to the patient, this particularly in case of placebo-controlled trials where we don't give a drug, but we give a, the look-alike of a drug. In such cases, if the patient dies, we may have to give the compensation. Then related to the adverse effect of concomitant medication as per the protocol. If patient is receiving any other concomitant medication as per the protocol, if that drug led to the adverse effect and patient dies because of it, then that also has to be compensated. Then there is very important, that is due to the delay in the reporting of SAE or failure to provide a medical care, that also will be compensated. Again, this will be very heavy on the sponsors and even to the investigator also. It will be very, very heavy. There is a formula to calculate the compensation. If the formula says 10 lakh rupees has to be given in the above other cases, if the reaction, where if the reaction has been reported late and there is a failure to provide the medical care, in that time, it will be maybe 10 times or 20 times more than what the actual calculated compensation is. Then, due to the lack of efficacy in a life-threatening condition, see, if the drug is intended for the treatment of some condition, if the drug doesn't show its expected efficacy, then in such cases, also a compensation would be provided to the person or a patient who might have died. Then moving forward, again, timeline of reporting and compensation. Here, if you look into that, investigator reports a SAE or a death to the DCGI sponsor and institutional ethics committee within 24 hours. Then the investigator also reports a detailed report within 14 calendar days, and IEC and expert committee evaluates causality and recommend the compensation. That which means that individually, institutional ethics committee or institutional review board will also be calculating the compensation, and that recommendation would be submitted to the CDSCO, and then CDSCO or the DCGI, and then the expert committee appointed by a DCGI will also look for its causality and the recommendation. They will also review the recommendations that has been given by the ethics committee. They also recalculate the compensation, and then they recommend the sponsor to provide the compensation. From there, 30 days starts for the sponsor to pay the DCGI, to follow or to be compliant with the DCGI's order, and that compensation to be usually would be given to the person who has been nominated by the the subject at the time of signing the informed consent. As like we give whenever we open a bank accounts, we give our nominees, correct? So like that, even in the clinical trials, nominees nominee detail would be collected, and that nominee will receive the compensation that has been prescribed by the DCGI. That too, it happens within 30 days, and the same report has to be communicated to the DCGI as well. So moving to the conclusion, safety reporting ensures participants' protection and data integrity. This is very important. Without without the safety reporting, we cannot ensure the safety of the participant, and we cannot protect our participants and data integrity. So if we don't report, what happens in the further days is anyone find out that so and so site has not reported a data, or so and so trial has sorry, so-and-so trial has not disclosed the SAE information, the whole integrity of the data would be in the stake. So they might feel that, okay, that particular trial has not disclosed some information, which means that they might have morphed some other information also as well. So that is why data integrity is very, very important. Then requires a lot of coordination between the investigator, sponsor, ethics committees, and regulators. So this is very, very important. So this is not just one man's responsibility or one individual responsibility. It is always a team responsibility or a stakeholder's responsibility. Everyone will have their own responsibilities, and that has to be has to be taken up with all due respect to the patient's integrity. Then timely and accurate reporting is a shared ethical and a legal responsibility. This is again very important. One thing is ethical responsibility and also legal responsibility as per the ICH GCP, which has been enforced to be a law in the clinical trials. We have to follow to that. So, With this small statement, I conclude my talk on safety reporting in clinical trials. Always remember, something which is not documented in the clinical trials, consider to be not done at all. So you might have done 101 things in the clinical trial in the due process of the conduct of the clinical trials. If one small statement is not documented, that means you have not done that activity. So always be careful whenever you are getting involved in the clinical trials. Try to capture the information as much as possible. It is not just capturing, try to document it. Make sure the documents are perfect, reviewed, and approved by the investigator. So that is when your efforts will always be considered. With this, I conclude my talk. If you have any questions, you can ask.
Dr. Shilpa ma'am,
Uh,
for your talk on clinical research regulations in India, Schedule Y, where madam was describing about IND forms 44, Part 10A of Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1945, 122A, B, DAE, various forms. He was describing about animal pharmacology, animal toxicology, regulatory pathways for the approval of IND and anti-drugs, guidelines for conducting clinical trials in biomedical research, which involves GCP, ICH, ICMR, and CD score guidelines for stem cell research and similar biologics and various others. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your elaborate talk. And the session was followed by another talk by Dr. S. Balaji sir on safety reporting in clinical trials, where sir was emphasizing on Schedule Y NDCT rules 2019 and ICMR guidelines. Sir was speaking about SEAs, serious adverse events by Institutional Ethics Committee, its reporting process required by various regulatory bodies like ICH, GCP, and other regulatory agencies like FDA, EMA, CD-SCO. Thank you, sir, for your extensive talk. And both of your talks were energizing and educative. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, madam.
I think the delegates, we can end up this session and we join tomorrow for getting enthusiastic and educative experience by tomorrow's speakers. Thank you all for attending. Thank you.